Thank you. Very atmospheric in the room for those at home. Hello to everyone that's managed to come along in person. Hello to all those watching live online, and hello to future people who will discover this online. I'm very much looking forward to becoming an internet sensation in due course. My name is Andrew, as you can see, and I'm a project support officer here at Norfolk County Council. And the title of my talk is Norfolk Windmills Trust and the restoration of the How Hill Mills. I gave this exact talk last night to Ludham Community Archive. Ludham, for those of you that don't know, is a village that's about 1.5 miles from How Hill. And being a community archive, they know everything there is to know about the area. So this talk has been thoroughly fact-checked. And any errors that remain in it are simply because between last night and 1 o'clock this afternoon, I didn't quite get to the bottom of the list. But at How Hill, there are 3 mills that are scheduled to be restored over the next few years. And the mill on this slide is one of them. And this is Turf Fen Drainage Mill. A nice silhouette. It's one of the most photographed mills in the Broads. I actually didn't go down to take a photograph of the mill at this period. I was going to take a picture of the starling murmurations, because if you go down at the right time of the year, there are fantastic murmurations that fly around the site of this mill. There's a video on Norfolk Windmills Trust YouTube channel if you flip between YouTube channels. If I was to give this talk an alternative title, I'd probably call it Putting Turf Fen Back on the Map. Because the old Explorer map for the Broads had Turf Fen Mill on it. So this is my favourite map of the Broads. And it would be good to see it back on there. So I'm going to start with a short history of Norfolk Windmills Trust and how its work with Norfolk County Council has helped transform the fortunes of several mills, historic mills across the county. And then I'm going to focus on the next big project, which County Council and the Windmills Trust is going to be involved in, which is the restoration of 3 mills, Turf Fen, Boardman's and Clayrack, which are all owned by Norfolk County Council. For those of you that don't know where How Hill is, I'll say it's about 1.5 miles west of Ludham. It's in the Broads National Park, in the upper part of the Broads. And if you don't know where that is, I'll be showing a map later, so don't worry. So starting with a short history of the trust. It's commonly known as the Norfolk Windmills Trust, but it's registered as a charity under the name the Norfolk Mills and Pumps Trust. I'm not expecting you to read the charitable objectives, but in summary, it was set up to preserve, for the benefit of the people of the county of Norfolk and the nation at large, windmills, watermills, and wind pumps of beauty or historic interest, and machinery or other buildings related to them. It was established in 1963, so it celebrated its Diamond Jubilee, 60th anniversary last year. There's been a number of publications, including the one on there, and for the people in the room, the actual book, again, which features Turf Fen on the cover. But why was such a trust required in Norfolk in 1963? Well, I've got a short bit of archive footage to show you with a former chairperson of the trust who will explain.
The windmill was an essential part of the East Anglian scene for about 300 years at least, until half a century ago, when it was superseded by steam and it was forgotten. Suddenly, somebody realized a few years ago that there were very few windmills left. And now we're faced with a situation which is serious, because we must save them for the benefit of the following generations. And to do this, it means money.
Just how big a problem is money?
It's a very serious problem, particularly at this precise moment of time when finances all round are extremely tight. And it's vital to us to maintain the existing windmills. And of course it runs into a large sum of money every time we have to do what may appear to be quite a simple operation.
Various of the trust logos on the screen here, obviously evolved since the trust was established, but unfortunately the financial situation doesn't seem to have improved much over time. Mills are still incredibly expensive to restore and maintain, and the money that's required appears to be increasingly difficult to get hold of. And of course, the political winds change direction, sometimes to the benefit of the mills and sometimes not. But the Trust, in close association with Norfolk County Council, have a good track record of securing funds, and that's allowed the good work to continue and for many mills to be saved. Most of the Trust regular funding comes via an annual grant from Norfolk County Council, and council officers like myself and Alison, who's in the room here with us, have usually been involved as part of the human resources towards putting those projects together. For most large restoration projects, however, large grants from some of the major awarding bodies are required, and this is augmented by money from the council and other smaller charities and grant awarding bodies. And the restoration of the How Hill Mills, the project for that is no different. So the Trust has been around for a while, since 1963. We're currently moving its archive to the Norfolk Record Office. Slightly ironic that in the process of looking after heritage assets, some of the things that the group has produced have become historic objects in their own right. The book in the hands of the people in this photograph, taken in 1977, is this one. It's called The Restoration of Windmills and Wind Pumps in Norfolk. And it also details a short history of the Trust and the background in there. Alfred Hodge, who we saw in the last video, is the person stood second to the right-hand side. Several other guides to mills were also produced around this time. But as you might imagine, the majority of the archive is actually made up of notes, transactions, and there's only a few gems like this scattered in between. The Trust is responsible for a large portfolio of mills. Some of these are owned by Norfolk County Council, such as Billingford Windmill. I've been told I can use a pointer on here, so let's try that. Billingford Windmill, top right-hand side of the screen. This was the last windmill to work commercially by wind in Norfolk, and it was the first to come under the care of the Trust. Others are leased by Norfolk County Council. This is the case for Gunton Park Sawmill in the top left-hand corner. And some are owned by Norfolk Windmills Trust directly, like Wicklewood Windmill in the top middle of the screen there. And some are leased to Norfolk Windmill Trust. So it's a complicated legacy, 61 years in the making. It's a bit like quantum mechanics, really. If you think you've understood it, you probably haven't. The three mills I'm going to be concentrating on are the ones at the top of the screen there, Turf Fen, Boardman's and Clayrack. And these three mills are all owned by Norfolk County Council. There are more. Apart from the sawmill at Gunton Park, most of the portfolio is made up of corn mills. Made up of drainage mills and corn mills. And of those, the majority are the drainage mills. The corn mills were usually built in towns or on the outskirts of towns and villages. And these were then demolished when they came to the end of their working life to make way for the buildings. But the Broad's drainage mills, on the other hand, they were simply abandoned because they tended to be built in out-of-the-way places. And this has turned out to be a really good thing, because at least the buildings and sometimes the machinery is still there and they can be saved. On the right-hand side of this picture, you can see the Reedham Marshes group. It consists of Polkes Mill, which is the black tower, a white sails, white cap at the top of the picture. This ran a scoop wheel that lifted water off the marshes. Below that, there is a steam engine house, which powered a turbine pump, which lifted water off the marshes using centrifugal force. Then we have a diesel engine house below that, which used diesel pumps to move water off the marshes. And then below that, the area where the modern electric pumps now operate. So on this one site, you've got the full evolution of drainage technology. Unfortunately, it's rather difficult to get to. But I'm pointing this out because this site shows what can be done when you come across these buildings and you do restore them. So if we look again at this, draw your attention to Polkes Mill at the top. the black tower, the white cap and sails. This is what it looked like around about 2002 before the restoration project. So the restoration of this mill took place between 2002 and 2005. You can also see the ruin of the steam engine shed in the background there. That was also restored as part of the project. This is the same mill, now restored to full working order. Sails can turn, wheel can be driven, and water can once again be lifted from the marshes into the air with the power of the wind. Of course, the mill is only run for demonstration purposes. The land is still, water levels in the land are still managed by electric pumps. But actually seeing these mills work has a different value sometimes than just hearing about how these things used to work. Unfortunately, Polke's Mill is rather difficult to get to because there are no public roads that lead there, which is why all of these visitors at one of the Heritage Open Days look slightly exhausted. They're all having a rest before looking around because they've walked the couple of miles along the riverbank from Redham to get there. But it's worth it because it's a magnificent site and there is a lot to see. This is Billingford Windmill again. On the left, as it appeared in 1957, the year after it stopped working commercially by wind. And as it was at the end of its working life, just with 2 sails. And on the right-hand side is an image of what the mill looks like today. Glorious 2-star listed mill with a full complement of sails and in working order. Familiar to some people in the audience who've come here who are volunteers at Billingford. So thank you for coming along today. And this is the most recently completed restoration project. This is at Stracy Arms Drainage Mill. This is another mill owned by Norfolk County Council. This mill stands alongside the River Bure, halfway between Great Yarmouth and Acle, and it's a major landmark as you drive along the Acle Strait. On the left of the picture, as it appeared immediately before it was restored, no blades on the fantail at the back of the cap, no sails attached to the wooden stocks at the front. And on the right, after it was restored, full set of sails with shutters now added, I should say, fantail on the back, and inside it looks just as good as well. It's been recovered on the inside, and it has a new suite of interpretation as well. So visitors to the mill get to know about its history and the people that ran it. But we are painfully aware that whilst one mill is receiving a lot of attention, there's lots of others that could do with it, that could benefit from a similar focus. But we can't restore all of the mills all at once. There's not sufficient resources for that. And even if there was the money, the skills needed to restore these buildings are in short supply. There's probably less than a dozen professional millwrights operating in England, and some of those are trying to retire. So a strategic project is required. And so we're very pleased that it's now the turn of the How Hill Mills to receive that attention. So that's a short history of the work of the Windmills Trust and its association with the County Council. And now on to the next big project, which is the restoration of the How Hill Mills. This is more or less how the How Hill Mills look at the moment, some of them looking more like mills than others. At this point, I should explain, for those of you that don't know exactly what these mills were for, this part of the talk was inserted after my wife said, "What are you going on about?" when I was rehearsing. So the marshes and the waterways of the Broads the waterways of the Broads, they're associated with grazing pasture that surround these areas, prime grazing pasture, but it's pasture that's also liable to flooding. And if the pasture gets flooded, then the water sits on the grass, it kills the grass, and then there's no food for the cattle. So these drainage mills were introduced to manage these water levels and pump water off the land when it was threatening to cover it, usually during the winter period. The water levels are still managed today. They're still actively managed, but now by electric pumps. They're doing the job instead of the windmills. But these 3 drainage mills are particularly important, a particularly important collection, because they represent 3 very different types of drainage mill. On the left, we've got Turf Fen Mill. This is a tall brick-built tower mill. It ran scoop wheels that physically lifted water from the marshes. In the middle, we've got Boardman's Mill, called a trestle mill. You can see the wooden frame or the trestle quite clearly, sometimes also called a skeleton mill for obvious reasons. Boardman's originally ran a scoop wheel, but this was later replaced by a turbine, which it still has. And finally, on the right-hand side, we've got Clayrack, obviously incomplete, but very useful for us because it demonstrates that it was a post mill. Whereas you can see the other two have either a brick tower or a timber tower that supports the cap. Clayrack mill just has a single post. The cap for that is called a buck, and that then sits on that single post. All are in need of restoration, and the plan is to restore each of them over the next few years, and it will be an ambitious undertaking. I said earlier that I like to think of this project as being putting Turf Fen back on the map. No offence to Thurn Mill, which is a lovely mill in its own right, but that's what's on the current cover. But at some point, we'll get Turf Fen back on there, I'm fairly sure. So as I said, all of these three mills are at How Hill, which is circled in red on the map there. And as I said, it's about 1.5 miles northwest of Ludham. If you're trying to orientate yourself on the map, Norwich is middle on the left, Yarmouth on the right, Lowestoft down at the bottom right. So it's very much in the northern Broads area. If you were to open up my favourite map, then you'd see this, a depiction of the Broads, and you've got the River Ant running from north to south on the left-hand side of the picture, and the River Ant runs past Clayrack first, then Boardman's, and Turf Fen, which sits on the opposite side of the river. This site is very popular with boaters, day trippers. The nearest boatyard, Richardson's, which is the largest fleet on the Broads, is located at Stalham, which is about 4 miles upstream of this site. And you can see from the number of blue icons dotted about that there are several other attractions at the site as well. This is a view from the cap of Turf Fen, looking out over How Hill House, which is that thatched mansion in the distance there. This is a Grade 2 listed building, built around 1905, designed by the Norwich architect Edward Thomas Boardman. He purchases the estate in about 1900. His dad was also an architect responsible for the buildings at the old Norfolk and Norwich Hospital on St Stephen's Road in Norwich, and for converting Norwich Castle into the museum that we're familiar with today, among a lot of other commissions. How Hill House was later owned by Norfolk County Council, run as an education centre, residential education centre. That closed in 1983, but it's still run as an education centre, but now by the How Hill Trust, independent. So as well as the 3 historic mills at the site, which are owned by the council, you've also got this arts and crafts inspired building, but that's not all. The moorings that you can see are owned by the Broads Authority, and they also own an old marshman's house, which is open as a museum, known as Toad Hole Cottage. The marshmen were the people who were employed to run the drainage mills. They also kept the drainage ditches clear, so the water could go down those, and they're also responsible for keeping an eye on the cattle that were grazing on the marshes, which, as I say, was the reason the mills were built in the first place. And Toad Hole Cottage has a display of their domestic arrangements, as well as a collection of traditional marshman tools, as well as tools associated with what they got up to at other times. The pleasure wherry Hartor, owned by Wherry Yacht Charter, is moored at How Hill for most of the season, and visitors can climb on board this to look round its interior, which is lavishly decorated in an Egyptian theme. And the wildlife at the site here is very special too. It's designated as How Hill National Nature Reserve. So the site's got several attractions, and for that reason, it's very popular for day trippers, tourists, and boaters. And all of these sites are within easy walking distance of each other as well. I hope you've noticed Turf Fen Mill just popping out there behind Hartall. And if you look off the starboard bow, you'll see Boardman's just poking out above the shrubbery there as well. So we'll have a more detailed look at the 3 mills in turn now, and what we're planning to do with them, starting with Turf Fen. This is Turf Fen Drainage Mill. This is the most recent picture I have of it. This is a drone photograph that belongs to Ollie Dennison, a windmill hopper who appears online now and again. And I do have permission to show this picture, so we can get away with YouTube recording. We'll see a couple more of his photographs later on. Turf Fen Mill actually stands in the parish of Barton Turf on the opposite bank of the River Ant to the house. It was granted Grade 2 star listed status in May 1987 by Historic England, but it was placed on Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register in 2023, along with Boardman's Mill. Historic England pointed out that this is in no way a slight on the owners, rather it recognises the current condition and vulnerability of the fabric, the challenges you face, and it allows us to prioritise strategic assistance towards your building. In fact, it's a grant of almost £243,000 from Historic England that is going to make the restoration of this mill possible. The last major project here at Turf Fen Mill was carried out in the early 1980s. Time has taken its toll, as it inevitably does on historic buildings that are exposed to the elements. And there are several particular characteristics of this location that are going to make restoring it quite challenging. There's no date attached to this photograph, unfortunately. It's thought that the mill stopped working in the early 1900s. And this isn't showing the mill in full working order. The fantail you can see has disappeared. So it was evidently taken after its working life. It still has shutters in the sails, so it's not a very nice position for it to be in. We'll come to why that is a bit later. As I say, it's a Grade 2 star listed building. And one of the reasons for this special designation, which is just one step down from a medieval church, is the fact that this mill ran 2 scoop wheels. And you can see the covers for them, or the hoodways as we call them, in either side of the bottom of the towers, one on that side and one of that side. More commonly, you'd see one scoop wheel running from a mill. The mill was built in the late 1880s by William Rust. He was a millwright based in Stalham, and there are a couple of others that we know from him that he built from scratch. Hyes Mill on the Thurn, 2 photos of it here, one from 1915 and one from 2009. And Hunsett Mill, which like Turf Fen stands beside the River Ant. This was another mill that ran 2 scoop wheels. They've been removed from the building, but you can still see, if I use the marker again, either side of the mill on the ground, the position of the 2 scoop wheels had been marked out with white gravel. So you can see where they did run. But back to the main character, Turf Fen Mill again. It's about 31 feet tall to the top of the brick tower. That's just shy of 9.5 meters. And as you can see, the mill doesn't have any sails attached to it just at the moment. The stocks won't turn round without the sails. And the stocks, I should say, are those long lengths sticking out the front of the cap, forming that X. Each of those stocks is about 46 feet long, or about 14 meters. So that's actually taller than the mill itself. The mill still has its fantail out the back there with the 6 blades on it. This would usually cause the whole cap to rotate to face the wind when the wind changed direction. You always want the wind to blow onto the front of the sails. If it blows into the back of the sails, it's called tailwinding, and that can cause quite significant damage. The cap itself is sat on 19 rollers on a special curb, and was this completely functioning, the cap would rotate on these 19 rollers when the fantail goes round. But the cap's been tied up since 2005 after problems were discovered with the curb. So for its own safety, it's tied up like that. Inside the mill, we're on the ground floor. And as you can see, well, on my screen you can, on this perhaps you can't. This is the pit wheel, and this pit that it runs in is filled with water. On other occasions, if you go to Turf Fen Mill, the entire ground floor may be covered in water. So this site regularly floods. This is one of the challenges here. Another special feature of the mill is this double gear. So this is an unusual feature. This allows the scoop wheels to be run at either a high or a low speed. And you can see the the remains of the two scoop wheels are still there either side of the mill. The wooden hoodways have long gone. The paddles that fit into the slots, you can see the gaps for the paddles where they would have gone in. They've long gone also, but the frames for those scoop wheels are still there. Okay, as you can see from these technical drawings, one of the things that we're going to have put on Turf Fen Drainage Mill is a new set of sails. A full restoration would involve putting shutters in these sails as well, so that the sails could run, they could turn around. We're not going to be doing that. We're preserving Turf Fen Mill as a landscape feature. If we were to put the shutters in, we'd also need to put a lot of other mechanics in so that you can open and close the shutters as well. And none of that is required if we're just maintaining it as a landscape feature. As I said, it's on the opposite side of the river. To get to it, you need a boat. It's not going to be run that often, even if we went to the expense of making it fully functional. If it was to be fully functional, we'd also have to restore both two scoop wheels, twice as much work as on normal drainage mills. And that's not necessary. There are electric pumps that are already doing that job. The cap will be rebuilt from the frame upwards. It will all be painted a brilliant white, and the curb will be repaired. So at the moment, if you go up and down the River Ant, the mill, it's quite rude, really. It always faces away from you when you go up and down the river. But in future, depending on the direction of the wind, it may be facing you, maybe looking slightly skew ways, but it will be rotating to face the wind. And some repairs to the brickwork, which are necessary, are also going to be carried out. Now, this is an old image. This isn't a drone. This is when, if you wanted an aerial photograph, you had to go up in an aeroplane. So this is one of Mike Page's images. And this is more or less what Turf Fen will look like when the restoration is completed. So it looks like a fully functional mill. It has a set of sails. It has a functioning fantail. The cap will be able to rotate. It won't be able to pump water. It's also quite a good photo for showing the problems at this site. All of the materials that have been removed from the mill will have to go across that river. All of the materials going to the mill will have to come across that river. So it's not going to be an easy operation. And like I said, it periodically gets flooded as well, just to throw that spanner into the works. And next we're off to Boardman's Mill, which is a little bit further upstream. And another one of Ollie's drone images. And this is the most up-to-date image of the mill that I have. And you can see here also the sails have been removed, and all we can see here on the front is the X formed by the stocks. And I can exclusively reveal, and I did last night as well to Ludham Community Archive. Can you exclusively reveal twice? I just have. That they've generously offered £238,733 towards the work required on this mill. That covers 79% of the costs. The County Council are contributing around £40,000 more, and the Windmill Trust are contributing £10,000. More grants are being applied for to cover shortfalls. Boardman's is one of a handful of trestle mills still standing in the Broads. And I say handful. Here are the other two. It's St Olave's on the left-hand side and Hobbs Mill on the right-hand side. And you'll notice that St Olave's doesn't really look like a trestle mill or a skeleton mill, as I referred to it earlier. And that's because its trestle has been covered by boarding. You see the boarding running across. And this confers some protection on the wooden frame underneath and some of the machinery. There is a plan, perhaps, at Clayrack to reapply some of this boarding to that mill. These mills can appear quite small from a distance, but that's a little bit of an illusion. It's a bit disconcerting. The closer you get to them, the bigger they seem to get. This is my colleague Amanda, who I've added for scale. She's checking the condition of one of the brick piers at Boardman's mill. I should add that Amanda is of average height, slightly taller, if anything, so this isn't meant to be an optical illusion or anything. And in this photograph, you can see that there is a footpath that runs directly below the sails of Boardman's mill. This is one of the reasons why the sails aren't currently on at the moment. When things get to such a state that things are likely to drop off, you don't want them to drop off and land on unsuspecting passers-by in the bottom. So that's purely done for safety. The sails were removed in September 2022. Boardman's mill was built by Dan England around 1897. His was a local company, England's of Ludham, and the firm had a hand in constructing many drainage mills in the Broads, and they're also associated with several innovations in mill technology, and possibly even the construction of these timber trestle mills. But Boardman's is a bit special because it is in the very parish that the company was based in. This photo, as you can see, is from 1934, when it is in full working order. At this point, it's 37 years old. And this was around the time that the electric pumps were starting to be put in. So it's around this time the mills start to get disused. The electric pumps weren't subject to the vagaries of the wind. They didn't require fuel to be transported to them like the old steam engines and diesel pumps. And so it's perhaps not surprising that these mills go into a rapid decline. So this is 1934. That's for reference for the next photo, which is just 16 years later. You can see the trestle is still there in this diagram, but the sails and the fantail appear to have been long gone. It looked much the same, and Hallam Ashley photographed it 8 years later than that, in 1958. And here again, in 1969. So at this point, it spent half of its life working and half of its life as a ruin. The mill wasn't restored until the late 1970s, early 1980s. So by that point, it had spent much longer as a ruin than as an active drainage mill. It requires a major overhaul once again now. It was also added to Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register. So what's planned? Boardman's will get a new cap, a slightly different design to the one it had in the 1970s, 80s restoration. I'm not going to pretend to understand what's more traditional about it, other than I understand the fantail is going to be slightly further back than it was before. And the cap will be fitted with a tail pole, which is the long length here, and a Y wheel. These come off the back of the cap, and ordinarily, if you had a full set of sails in with shutters, this is where the chain would be located that you would pull and open and close the shutters. Now, like Turf Fen, we're not going to put shutters on Boardman's mill. We're not going to be running this mill, but the tail pole and the Y wheel there will look authentic in the landscape. We will get new sails though. The old ones have been used as a pattern for the new ones. From the centre of the canister, which is the bit in the centre of the sails, it's the bit where the stocks pass through, to the tip of the sail. So from the centre here to the tip of one of the sails, that measures about 19 feet. It's about 6 meters. So from one side of the sail right to the other side of the sail, we're talking a distance of 40 feet or about 12 meters. So these aren't small, even though when you're in a boat, they might look small from a distance. The metalwork metal components. They're going to be reused wherever possible, so there'll be the authentic material, including the curb, which is the metalwork that allows the cap to rotate, the fantail gearing, which allows the curb to be used to turn the cap round, the wind shaft, which is the shaft that goes right the way through the cap with the brake wheel attached, and of course the brake wheel itself. If they're not judged to be sufficient quality when the mill is dismantled, they will be used for referencing for the production of new parts. Another thing that's going to be done to the mill is it's going to be wedged upright. It's developed a slight lean to the east, and this is going to be corrected by putting wedges underneath. I do have a slide of that, but the wedges will be very, very small, so it's not really worth doing, but it's going to be wedged so it sits upright. And the work here and at some of these other mills I'm talking about today should provide opportunities for the learning of traditional building skills and mill writing skills as well. This has been something that's been trialled at some mills on the Broads, Mutton's Mill most recently as part of the Broads Authority's Watermills and Marshes scheme. So it would be good to try and get younger people involved in the trades, because we are going to need them in the future if these things are going to be maintained in the same way that these mills were maintained in the past. So we're looking forward to seeing Boardman's at its best. Again, we've got one of Mike Page's aerial photographs here. And again, this is roughly what it's going to look like. I say, of course, the cap is going to be more traditional, the fantail is going to be further back, but it will have a set of sails with open frames and fantail at the back, and it will turn to wind. And finally, we arrive at Clayrack Mill. And this is the most up-to-date picture I have of Clayrack. You don't need me to tell you that this requires a fair amount of work. However, most of the structure you can see here is sound, and it will be retained. It requires a new hoodway. That's the case that covers the scoop wheel again. You can see the several boards that are missing from here. You see it very clearly in all this drone shot. Now, despite the look of this mill, it's worth saying that not many of us can say we're in better condition now than we were 43 years ago. Although I was 7. But Clayrack Mill can, even in its current state. This is Clayrack Mill in 1981 at Ranworth, where it was rediscovered, disused, disintegrating. The Nature Conservancy Council, who didn't want it, at least they didn't want it restored at Ranworth, they gave it to Norfolk County Council. It was relocated to How Hill, and it was restored by the millwright Richard Seago in 1987 and 1988. And it was erected on Clayrack Marsh, and so it's become known as Clayrack Mill. So the mill isn't in its original location, and that's one of the reasons it's not officially listed as a listed building. And because it was rediscovered without sails or a book or anything above the frame, all this had to be based on designs that we know of, pictures of other post mills that once operated at places like Ersted and Beela. And this is the result of that restoration. We don't know who made Clayrack Mill originally. It's got 4 anti-clockwise turning sails, patent sails with the shutters in, and an 8-bladed fantail. It's worth saying for the purposes of the recording that the shutters in these, the patent sails, they were designed by a Norfolk-born chap, William Cubitt from Dilham. Fantastic innovation that allows you to change the surface area of the sails without stopping the mill. Something that other countries could still learn from, even if it's about 200 years too late. You can also see from the hoodway here, it ran a scoop wheel. Now, in that previous photograph, it looks tiny. And try not to be distracted by Boardman's, which is trying to put in a guest appearance in the bottom part of the photo here. What we're really looking at, I try to draw your attention to, is this chap, halfway up the sails here. This is Stephen Earle from the Norfolk Windmills Trust, and the caption at the bottom says that he's checking the sails, but I think he's just posing for a photograph. But it does give you an idea of scale. The caption also says that this mill is thought to be the only one of its kind in Britain, and that's probably also true. This might be as close as we can get. This is Palmer's Mill. This is another mill that was restored by Richard Seago, and again, this mill doesn't stand where it originally did. This was removed from Acle and re-erected next to Upton Dyke. Now, this is a lot smaller, but there are two main similarities. It is a post mill, so you can see it's supported by a single post. And the cap on top, that's what we call the book. At Turf Fen Mill, like I say, and at Boardman's Mill, both of these are either a brick tower that's holding the cap up or a timber frame that's holding it up. In the case of each of these, Clayrack and Palmer's, it's a single supporting post. And the second similarity with Clayrack is that this post is hollow and that the shaft that transmits the drive down runs through the centre of the shaft. So it's a hollow post mill. Now, these mills were probably used extensively across the Broads, later than the tower mills. They are cheaper to build, they're cheaper to maintain, but they are they are more vulnerable to the elements as well. So that probably explains why most of them have disappeared. I had to share this picture from the Picture Norfolk archive. I'm not sure exactly where it is or what year this mill was photographed, but it is rather wonderful. You see, this is a post mill. You can see all straight through the book as well. And you can see that the post is shored up with all kinds of random bits of branches and trees. Quite a lot of character. But one of the best bits is the note that is written on the mount of this photograph, which apparently says, "Ancient marsh mill in Norfolk, very primitive. I asked the old farmer if I might photo it. The feeble old fellow apologised for its dilapidated condition, but assured me that it would work all right if only you could get some time to do it up a bit." And I'd like to think that's him in the photograph there. This is a photograph by Emerson. I like to think he's just turned up a little bit too late to save this mill, because it looks like it's in somewhat of worse condition. Evidently the same mill, but evidently even more dilapidated than previously. So this is what we currently have. As I say, there is evidence that there was boarding between the timbers of this mill originally, and one of the plans is to reinstate those timbers, and that would offer some protection to the frame and the machinery inside. And hopefully you can see what I mean here, that the dark triangles at the base of this is trying to represent where the timbers may go, the weatherboarding may go across there. And I hope you can see in these plans that the idea is to restore this of the three mills to full working order. So you can see we've got a scoop and a scoop wheel at the top, and we have sails with the shutters in place as well. This is not to replace the electric mills on the site, of course. This is just so we can run it for demonstration purposes. The size of it is manageable, so we can do that. Some diagrams of the scoop wheel here with 18 paddles that would be lifting water, and at the top there, the rather ominous looking shape at the top, the black one, that's the cover for the scoop wheel, the hoodway. And all this work is dependent on funding, of course. Clayrack isn't a listed building like Turf Fen and Boardman's, so neither of those were both eligible for grants from Historic England, which give grants to listed buildings. That's not the case for Clayrack. So we are putting together an application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for this part of the project. The new fantail and the fan frame, and new gearing that will be at the top of the post in the bottom centre of the picture. And then how that fantail and the fan frame attaches to the book. At home, my son has recently bought a 3D printer. And every time I look at these things, I think, surely we can make a little model one at home, or even a full-scale one for the garden. I shall ask the people who actually run our household if that's possible. And here we have the entire book with the fantail and the fan frame. And I mentioned the terms wind shaft and brake wheel earlier on. The wind shaft is this axle that runs through here, and the brake wheel is the gear that's attached to the wind shaft. This transmits the drive down into the in the case of Clayrack, the scoop wheel. And finally, we've got the sails. You can see the open frames at the bottom here. This is at the top here representing the shutters. And then we've got the striking rod. This will go right the way through the book. This is the spider at the front. And by turning this wheel at the back using the chain, it moves the spider in and out, and that opens and closes the shutters. So we will be able to run this mill and have people come to visit it. Now, I mentioned earlier that the work at Clayrack Mill, we're hoping will be funded by a grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And so this requires it to be a much larger project than solely the restoration of this mill. It will require community engagement work, traditional skills training, and we hope to draw in some of the other attractions I've talked about at the site, the wherry, the museum, the residential centre, and of course the other two historic mills at the site. There are stories to be told about these mills. There's stories to be told about the Marshmen and the Marsh families that ran them, the Boardman family, the wildlife, and the enthusiasm to put this project together, to tell these different stories and to make the resources will require engagement across the community in the local area. And so we're very interested to hear from any group or any individuals that are interested in playing a part in that. So we're very excited about this prospect. At the end of the presentation, I'll put up an email address that you can contact us on. But I'm just going to finish by showing a quick video of what Clayrack may look like when we've completed the restoration, because Nigel Pope from Ludham Community Archive was very kind enough to share a video that he took in 2003 when Clayrack was actually working. So I'm just going to close with Thank you very much.